Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're uncovering the absolutely fascinating history behind two of America's most iconic landmarks and how their stories became just forever intertwined. You see, for millions of immigrants arriving in America, one incredible sight marked the absolute beginning of a totally new life, a towering copper statue standing right there in New York Harbor. So, we're going to look closely at how the Statue of Liberty and nearby Ellis Island came together to tell what is arguably one of the most significant stories in American history, the story of immigration itself.
So let's just dive right in with a pretty massive question. How exactly did a giant copper statue transform from a gesture of international friendship into the ultimate symbol of immigration? I mean, it definitely didn't happen overnight. As we'll see, it was this wild journey of engineering, shifting national identities, and literally millions of courageous human journeys.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer, spanning nearly a century. We're starting in the 1860s, when the idea first popped up, hitting the 1886 dedication, checking out Ellis Island opening in 1892, looking at that famous poem added in 1903, all the way to Ellis Island finally closing in 1954. Let's get going.
All right, part one, a gift from France. Let's rewind to way before this statue was ever on a postcard.
The whole thing actually kicked off back in the 1860s with a French historian named Edouard de La Boulaye. He had this incredibly grand vision. He wanted to create a monumental gift for the United States, specifically to celebrate the deep friendship between France and America, and to honor the democratic ideals they both shared. Now, keep in mind, at this stage, the idea had absolutely zero to do with immigration. It was purely about international diplomacy.
And pulling this off, it took some serious international teamwork. You had the French sculptor Frédéric-Auguste Bartholdi taking on the monumental task of designing the outside. But to keep a giant copper lady standing upright in those harsh New York harbor winds, they needed some structural genius. Enter Gustave Eiffel. Yep, the exact same guy who built the Eiffel Tower. He designed the internal framework. And over in America, everyday citizens literally crowdfunded the pedestal by tossing their pennies into grassroots campaigns run by local newspapers.
So, moving from the drawing board to reality. Part two, building Lady Liberty. The logistics here are just wild. They didn't build her in New York. Nope, the statue was fully constructed first in France. Then, to get it across the ocean, they had to take the whole thing apart, pack the pieces into over 200 massive crates, ship them across the choppy Atlantic Ocean, and put her back together like a giant puzzle on what was then called Bedloe's Island, which of course we know today as Liberty Island.
Which brings us to a really crucial point in this early era, 1886. Specifically, October 28, 1886. That was the day President Grover Cleveland attended the formal dedication ceremony. Huge crowds, lots of celebrating. But here's the fascinating part. Historical records show its specific association with welcoming immigrants hadn't fully formed yet. That identity was going to take a few more years to develop.
And that association really took root when a tiny island nearby got a massive new job. Welcome to part three. The Ellis Island era.
In 1892, Ellis Island officially opened its doors right there in the harbor as a federal immigration processing station. Because it was located right next to the Statue of Liberty, for arriving immigrants, especially those making that incredibly long, exhausting trip from Europe, Ellis Island became their literal front door, the very first stop upon reaching the U.S.
Now, getting through Ellis Island was a highly organized, pretty strict process. After getting off the ship, families had to go through thorough medical inspections, followed by detailed legal interviews. Only if they cleared all those rigorous hurdles were they granted formal entry to start their new lives. Honestly, try to imagine the mix of exhaustion, sheer anxiety, and then, hopefully, total relief in those processing halls.
Over 12 million immigrants. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to the historical estimates, more than 12 million people passed through the doors of Ellis Island between 1892 and 1954. That is an absolutely mind-boggling volume of people, and it fundamentally shaped the demographic fabric of the entire nation.
All those arrivals completely shifted how the world looked at that giant copper statue next door. Let's look at part four, a lasting symbol. In 1903, they made a pivotal addition. A plaque bearing lines from Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus, was added to the statue's pedestal. You know the famous words about welcoming those yearning to breathe free? When they added this, it was a total game changer. It completely transformed the statue's public identity. It was no longer just a monument to French-American friendship, it was forever linked to immigrants seeking freedom and opportunity. It literally became the Copper Gate to a new world.
Fast forward to today, and the legacy of both these sites is immense. They're both protected as national monuments, maintained by the National Park Service, so future generations don't lose this history. And the impact is so deep that historians figure a huge percentage of Americans alive today can trace at least one ancestor right back to a ship that docked at Ellis Island. The history isn't just sitting in a museum, it's quite literally in our family trees.
Now, it's really important to note for our explainer that while these monuments preserve a very specific chapter of the past, the story didn't just freeze in 1954. Immigration policy and the public discussion around it has continuously evolved throughout American history. It was, and honestly still is, a really active subject of ongoing national debate today. We're keeping our focus strictly on the history of these landmarks, but it's clear the broader conversations they sparked are still very much happening.
But ultimately, these copper and brick structures represent way more than famous landmarks to check off a tourist itinerary. They capture a defining moment. For millions of families, sailing past that green statue and stepping into Ellis Island was day one. It was the absolute beginning of their American story.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about for our next chapter. We know how they arrived, and we know exactly what gate they passed through. But what on earth drove 12 million people to leave everything they knew behind and brave a turbulent ocean in the first place? What were they running away from, and what were they running toward? Well, we're going to explore exactly why immigrants came to America in our next explainer. Until then, keep exploring.